Hey gang, thanks for tuning in. I'm doing this very, very special report on these late allegations, these crazy allegations against Vince McMahon. But I wanted to give you a heads up before we get started. There are some pretty crazy things in this story that unfortunately we have to go into some detail on. So please use discretion. Let's get started. This is the fall of Vince McMahon. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is part 12 of the fall of Vince McMahon, a very special series of episodes that I've put together. I've been with you for how many hours now? Thank you very much for being with me. This is episode 12. This is the wrap-up. This is the review. Let's very quickly review episode 11, which was called Mrs. McMahon and the NDA. We kind of discussed a whole myriad of things, right? You've got this crazy situation, everything going on. Janelle Grant is sending videos. She's having these explicit relationships. She's under the thumb of Vince McMahon and John Laurinaitis, and everything just seems so crazy and about ready to pop. And then all of a sudden, the board, an anonymous email leaks the information about the affair to the board of WWE. They put together a panel to investigate the situation. Linda McMahon finds out about it, and that puts the pressure on Janelle Grant via Vince McMahon to sign an NDA. An NDA gets signed under very suspicious circumstances, and basically WWE agrees to pay a whole bunch of money, 3 installment payments of $1 million each, and that the first payment gets made in February of 2022. And then in February of 2023, the next payment doesn't come through. The taxes aren't taken care of like they were supposed to be. And various other pieces of medical care for Janelle Grant aren't taken care of either. And that's basically where things start to fall apart as far as the arrangement is concerned. And where we left things was that Janelle Grant lost the job that she had just prior to February of 2023. The lawsuit claims primarily because of the trauma and abuse related to this whole fiasco, this whole journey that this has been. And so here we are. Let's do a quick recap, and let's answer a couple of 3 really specific questions. 1, what gifts, besides employment that we discussed in detail, what gifts does the lawsuit allege Vince McMahon provided to Janelle Grant? That's question 1. Question 2 is, what specifically is Grant claiming, right? We've told this long story, a series of events, but what are the conclusions that Grant wants us to come to as a result of knowing this story? And then third and finally, the question really comes down to, why is she filing the lawsuit? What is she asking for in relation to this? So let's start with the first question. The first question is, what did she materially get out of this arrangement? And you can see an escalation. So it's done very systematically. It's just a straight list. So in 2019, the lawsuit alleges that Miss Grant received the following: alternative clinic medical care and medical and cosmetic services and products. Not specifically listed. That's all that it says. Clubhouse access tickets to the Belmont Stakes. Again, both of those things were mentioned previously in our story. WrestleMania private full-day transportation and premium tickets. Again, that was mentioned. I believe in episode 1, we mentioned that. A $2,000 Nordstrom gift card. And a massive box of Godiva chocolate. So this is all conceivably in the first 9 months, because they meet in March of 2019. This is all in the 9 months that spans 2019. Okay, now let's see what happens. Let's take a look at how things escalate. So, in 2020, the lawsuit alleges that she received $20,000 towards surgery, which was paid directly to the surgeon's office. So I'd be very interested to hear what surgery that is. A pearl and diamond lariat necklace from Betteridge in Greenwich, Connecticut. blue cashmere knee-length cardigan from Nordstrom, blue Burberry check cashmere scarf from Nordstrom, blue cashmere and fur hat from Nordstrom, gray cashmere shawl from Nordstrom, Celine sunglasses from Nordstrom, a cable knit throw blanket, and large bouquets of flowers delivered approximately every other week. So we can see an escalation right now. We're buying goods, we're buying necklaces, we're financing or helping to finance particular cosmetic surgeries and procedures that she wants. And then, of course, now we're talking about consistent delivery of flowers throughout 2020. 2021, this is when things start to get really crazy. So the lawsuit alleges that she received a 2022 BMW 430 Xi, $5,000 gift certificates at Lanphier Spa, 2 private chef-catered dinners in McMahon's condo. Now, those aren't specifically outlined in the lawsuit at all. At least it doesn't mention that it's chef-catered, so I'm not sure if these are particular visits that are already outlined earlier in the story, or if these are just sort of buried somewhere in the ether of the myriad of visits that she made that maybe wasn't mentioned inside this lawsuit previously. Gold and diamond paperclip necklace from Betteridge in Greenwich, Connecticut. $15,000 in Bloomingdale's gift cards, which is specifically outlined. The lawsuit sort of infers that it's due to, it comes on the heels of a sexual assault incident that occurred between Vince and Grant. Food assortment display and antique tea ceremony set from Saudi Arabia, and large bouquets of flowers delivered approximately every other week. So it'll be interesting, assuming that this lawsuit does move forward, it'll be interesting to see the proof that pans out, because there really is no way that somebody with her means, I mean, especially $75,000 a year, living where she lives in that area, being able to drop 20 grand on surgery, or, if she is able to provide any kind of proof of these, consistent deliveries of flowers. I'm not exactly sure, I don't exactly remember at what point she received the promotion to the $200,000 a year job, but I would imagine a 2022 BMW 430 Xi is going to be pretty handy for anybody, almost no matter what wage you're making. Not to mention the $15,000 in gift cards and the private chef dinners and all that stuff. So again, you can see as there's a clear pattern here of escalation, which again, assuming it's all true, would indicate a certain level of guilt/control on Vince McMahon's part. Okay, so the actual bullet point claims of the lawsuit, I'm just going to read them verbatim because they're very succinct. Miss Grant was a subordinate and vulnerable victim to predators, not a consenting and willing participant. That's the first thing that's claimed. So we told you this whole story. We reviewed all these details to drive home the point. She is a subordinate and vulnerable victim. She is not a consenting and willing participant. Okay, 2. Vince McMahon controlled WWE during Grant's employment, and the company knew, but did nothing about McMahon's exploitation of Miss Grant. This one's a little bit tougher to deal with. I mean, proving that other people knew stuff, if you can offer proof that John Laurinaitis was directly involved in the relationship, then you could say John Laurinaitis knew. But how do you prove that other members of the board knew? This lawsuit specifically doesn't really offer up a whole lot of information or provides an awful lot of detail to support that. It might be the kind of thing that they're looking to get upon discovery, assuming the lawsuit is able to move forward. It claims that circumstances surrounding the NDA and its invalidity and McMahon and WWE's disregard for the NDA. So this one is probably the strongest claim that this lawsuit makes from the very beginning, which is basically that the NDA is invalid for a whole myriad of reasons, which I'll get to later, but that WWE and Vince McMahon showed disregard for the NDA. So again, simply by producing the NDA and saying, look, it says 3 installments of $1 million, and then saying, hey, look, I didn't get the second $1 million. Again, that pretty clearly invalidates the NDA. And then finally, Miss Grant's life after the abuse and resulting damages. So again, we talk about, it mentions specifically in our last episode, we talked about the extending harm, right? We talk about the physical abuse during the time and the damage that comes with that. We talk about the mental abuse and associated illnesses and problems with that. And then, of course, we talk about, at least the lawsuit claims, that there were subsequent impacts from that abuse, right? Her inability to hold down a job, and so on and so forth. Those claims aren't really specifically outlined in here, but assuming that relief is granted from the NDA, I'm sure that more of that information will come to light. So what is she claiming exactly? She is claiming that she is entitled to what's called declaratory relief, which basically means that she wants a judge to declare the NDA invalid. And she's saying that it can be declared totally void under basic common law against both Vince McMahon and WWE. They claim that the NDA is too broad. I can't really weigh in on that, as I haven't seen the NDA and I don't know, but that's a claim that's made. That it was entered under duress. Right now, there isn't a lot of evidence to support that outside of the claims inside the lawsuit. It'll be interesting to see if any of that actually gets produced. That it is a contract of adhesion, which is a very specific term. It means that Grant had no meaningful choice because proposed changes were rejected under mounting pressure from Vince. This one, in my opinion, is a little bit flimsy. Obviously, pressure is applied to multiple people in multiple situations. You could interpret it and say that, well, because he had sort of unusual control over her, granting the truths that are listed above in the lawsuit, you could say, well, this isn't a normal business type relationship where maybe you find little ways to apply pressure, but because he had such an overwhelming amount of control over her, and because she was so subordinate to him, perhaps that created an excess amount of pressure on Janelle Grant that forced her to sign this contract under duress. We'll see about that. That the NDA is grossly one-sided. Again, haven't seen the NDA, can't weigh in on that. And number 5, it's an act against public policy. Enforcing it would empower a sexual predator and silence a victim of sexual violence. Not sure that that's going to be within the scope of this. Again, the point of this lawsuit isn't necessarily to declare whether the facts that are presented within this particular filing of the lawsuit are true or false. Because it's not a fact-finding mission, not sure that this 5th one is particularly strong. But definitely the strongest one is to say that it's a contract of adhesion. That seems to me to be the strongest evidence. In addition to that, she's claiming that there's a violation of the TVPA against McMahon and Laurinaitis, that Vince communicated with Grant while traveling and transported others, including WWE superstars and Laurinaitis, from out of state. So this is the sex trafficking claim. So because Vince transported himself, transported superstars, transported Laurinaitis across state lines, specifically with the intent to have a sexual encounter with her, that apparently their claim, the claim of the lawsuit, is that it meets the definition of sex trafficking. That there was a clear quid pro quo, sex for job security and advancement, that coercion and fraud was used to receive sexual encounters from Grant, that they knew that the job that Grant had was very important to her, and that Vince knew that the job would be temporary as he dealt with the issues, as he has dealt with issues of this nature before. So the claim in the lawsuit is that Vince basically knew that the job would never hold, that it wasn't a real thing, that it was complete faux pas, complete kabuki theater from the very beginning. And he knows that because he's used this technique before. So that would rely on outside testimony from other people coming forward. And that Vince knew that she was a vulnerable target, that essentially meeting her initially at his condo and her sort of spilling her guts to him that we reviewed back in episode 1 sort of gave him the information that he needed to kind of fix in on her as a particular target. In addition, the lawsuit claims that there was participation in a venture that violated the TVPA. Again, that's the sex trafficking against WWE. That WWE knowingly participated in the trafficking. Again, tough one to prove. That WWE knew or recklessly disregarded Vince's practice of sexual coercion. That's a little bit easier, especially given some of the claims that John Laurinaitis has come out with, which we'll review in our next and final episode on the fallout. That other WWE employees and board members were aware of the situation between Vince, Laurinaitis, and Grant. That's probably going to require some discovery or somebody else coming forward. That multiple WWE employees assisted Vince in maintaining Grant's position and advancing Grant. So now you have to prove that, let's say, the HR people or the corporate officers involved in WWE were aware of what Vince was trying to do, that they knew it was fake, and that they were basically following Vince's lead in empowering him to take part in this great plan to use Grant like this. And that WWE directly benefited from Grant's actions by maintaining talent, such as WWE Superstar. So the inference there is that this is a clear technique that has been used in the past to retain WWE talent. Because of that, Grant was used that way. Because of that, that now brings WWE into the fold as basically a co-conspirator in the sex trafficking and other associated offenses. That WWE was negligent. That's another claim that's made by the lawsuit. That they failed to ensure a safe working environment for Grant, and that they had what's called a duty of care that they failed to uphold, that they did nothing to prevent Vince or Laurinaitis' actions throughout the entirety of this whole process, that WWE, by commission and omission, allowed and tolerated sexual assault and humiliation and fostered a culture in which such acts would be tolerated. Some testimony would help back that up. That WWE, by commission and omission, retained McMahon and Laurinaitis despite actual and or constructive knowledge of their propensity to entice, recruit, force, and coerce women into sexual acts based on the promise of higher job security and advancement. Again, you're going to have to produce some additional women to back that up. And that WWE failed to warn Miss Grant of the risks of harm to which she was subjected while employed by WWE. Pretty clear there. It claims civil battery against both McMahon and WWE and Laurinaitis and WWE. That Grant was subjected to numerous instances of civil battery after meeting McMahon and even after the NDA was assigned. We talked in the last episode about that last sexual encounter at his condo, and that Grant experienced trauma. Same thing with Laurinaitis, the implication being that she experienced civil battery at the hands of Laurinaitis, again, specifically on WWE grounds and in specific instances, and even hotel rooms conceivably paid for by WWE. And that McMahon and Laurinaitis' conduct was malicious in nature, and that they sought to degrade, humiliate, and objectify Grant for their own gratification. And that WWE is vicariously liable for the conduct of McMahon and Laurinaitis, as described above. So again, it's all, how do you separate the black from the socks, that Vince McMahon and WWE are one entity. When one acts, the other does. Maybe one's a shadow of the other, might be a better way of wording it. And then, of course, there's the there are claims of intentional and neglectful infliction of emotional distress against Vince McMahon and WWE, in addition to Laurinaitis. So again, I'm not going to go into too many details, but of course, assuming all these things in the lawsuit are 100% true, then of course having these experiences could very well subject Grant to the kind of emotional distress that might come with those kinds of experiences, because she experienced those at the hands of Laurinaitis and McMahon, and assuming she can prove that WWE was aware and negligent of that, then they would all be considered liable for those things as well. Okay, last question, last point. So what is she asking for in this lawsuit? You've told us this big, long story. You've listed all these things you've gotten from him. You've made all of these claims, provided some evidence for some of it. Obviously, a lot of evidence still missing that needs to be produced. What are you actually asking for? There are three primary things that Grant is asking for in this lawsuit. Number one, She's asking for a declaratory judgment that the NDA is void and unenforceable and does not bar any of the plaintiff's claims against the defendants McMahon and WWB. So again, with that NDA in hand, that basically stops any real recourse that Grant might have, whether that be speaking out to get more damages, whether that be suing for breach of contract, whether that be legal proceedings. I mean, if she wants to go to the police, she can tell this entire story to the police and to prosecutors, and none of that evidence would be admissible at all because she's not allowed to talk about it, right? Otherwise, she has to give the money back. So, typically, again, having not seen the NDA, I don't know specifically what the damages would be associated with it. Sometimes you just have to give the money back. Sometimes there's more harsher penalties associated with it, so I don't know what the NDA says, but she's looking for a declaratory judgment, basically for a judge to throw out the NDA, saying that it's totally void and invalid, as if it never even happened. 2, she's asking for what is called a judgment for compensatory damages, reasonable attorney's fees, costs, and punitive damages against the defendants pursuant. Not sure that this one is going to get granted. Again, the point of this lawsuit isn't necessarily to be a deep dive into the truth of the matter. There are definitely some facts that need to get verified, right? You have to verify that the NDA, like any facts that you would need to determine that the NDA is invalid. You'd have to verify those facts. But the purpose of the lawsuit isn't really to go in and to award her damages. Maybe if you prove that the second installment payment that was agreed to wasn't delivered, maybe then you're entitled to some kind of compensatory damages associated with it. But the idea that a judge is going to come in and, or anybody really, is going to come in, verify all the facts that are listed in the 64-page filing, and then even assuming they're all true, award some kind of damage to her associated with that, that's not really within scope. It's a much more narrower scope. We're talking specifically about any damages that might have been accrued in association with the breaking of the NDA. So again, let's talk specifically about this. She claims in the lawsuit that she was entitled to basically tax relief, that McMahon is going to take care of any taxes associated with the initial $1 million payment. If that didn't happen, a judge might be inclined to go, okay, well, you're going to give her X amount of money as compensatory damages associated with having to pay the tax on that $1 million that was given, because that's what the NDA says. Or there might be some kind of a penalty associated with you not fulfilling your obligation to give her the money that you promised you would give her in the NDA. Something like that. And then 3, and this one is almost always included in every kind of lawsuit like this, just to generalize, it says such other and further relief as the court deems just and proper. So we leave it in your hands, Judge, to decide if there are any other additional things that you think should be covered. So, very interesting there, kind of summing it all up into one thing. She's claiming that a lot of harm has come to her as a result of the experiences that she went to. She seems to be pretty open and honest about some of the benefits, right? Again, this whole section of the lawsuit kind of lends some credibility to it. I mean, she's listing benefits that she actually had that were associated with this. So she's definitely not hiding the ball in the course of this lawsuit. So there you have it. So part 13, the last part, going to be coming up tomorrow. We're going to be talking about some of the fallout. Obviously, we're only about 2 or so weeks out from the actual lawsuit filing at this point. This is something that's going to go on and on and on and on and on. Lord only knows. It could go on beyond even Vince McMahon's life, so we don't know at this point. But we're going to talk about some of the initial things that have happened as a result of it, just kind of review those, and I'm sure we'll check in later to see where we are. So, if you haven't checked out parts 1 through 10, please go back and do it. It's a fascinating story. It's filled with drama and suspense and all these crazy things. Honestly, it's the perfect example of the truth being stranger than fiction. So please go back and check it out, and please join us next time for part 13, the fallout. Keep watching so we can keep wrestling with the business.